Sorry about that. Okay. Good. All right. Good afternoon. I'm Joe Popkin, Executive Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Criminal Justice Services. I'm honored to be here today on behalf of Governor Hochul and Commissioner Rosado. First, I want to thank Mayor Sheehan, McCarthy, and Madden for joining me for today's discussion. This is our 8th one throughout New York State on this vital topic. As a Capital Region resident, I'm particularly grateful for the exceptional local leadership that we have had on public safety and other critical issues. This approach, what we did here today, was about hearing from the community because we recognize that these are problems that are going to be identified locally and need to be solved locally. And it's incumbent upon the state to hear those voices, hear the voices of the community members that you see gathered today, to be able to take that back, to build it into our action plan to prevent and reduce gun violence. Second, I want to briefly share the governor's gun violence prevention actions. In October, the governor signed a package of bills into law that were meant to go after the scourge of ghost guns, which prefaced the Biden administration's actions last month. In November, she committed more than $30 million in grants to fight gun violence, and that emergency surge has been increased and also continued this year in the enacted budget. In January, the governor launched a 3-part agenda to prevent and reduce gun violence by tripling our investment in community-based responses, investing in law enforcement capabilities to solve gun crimes, and creating the Interstate Task Force on Illegal Guns. In 4 short months, this agenda has already turned into action. 2,000 firearms have been removed from our streets since she convened the task force, which is a 20% increase in total guns seized over this time last year. Dozens of new street outreach workers employed by SNUG, who we've represented here today, were the first to be trained at the state's Preparedness Training Center in Oriskany, allowing them to practice these skills in conflict resolution and dispute resolution in a real-world environment. Kaliana Thomas, who joins me today, was appointed by the governor, and will share a few words in a minute. And finally, the governor secured nearly $250 million, $227 million, in the enacted budget to fund initiatives that will strengthen gun violence prevention efforts of both law enforcement and community-based organizations. So for the Division of Criminal Justice Services, this enacted budget is a game changer. The budget provides our agency with more than $100 million in additional funding, which we will dedicate primarily to address gun violence. Before COVID-19, we had record lows in firearm-related homicides, shooting incidents, and shooting victims within our partner cities. So today's biggest question was, how do we make that positive change again? And I think the 3 things that we heard were building capacity within the local organizations who do things like mental health, social work, case management, better coordinating among our government partnerships and organizations to make sure that we hear the community's feedback and can put our resources where the needs are, and then collaborating. How do we develop an action plan that everybody has joint ownership over so that we can improve youth outcomes and at the same time make sure that we're reducing gun violence? So we want to thank our partners for their time and sharing their insights. This series of conversations will continue to help inform our work as we seek to make New York a safer, more equitable, and vibrant state, which is exactly what Governor Hochul has boldly envisioned. Mayor Sheehan, McCarthy, and Madden, thank you again for your partnership. I'd now like to turn it over to Kaliana for a brief second. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, Joe. Joe makes my work so much easier. Thank you, Joe. My name is Kaliana Thomas. I am the director of the State Office for Gun Violence Prevention. These conversations are the foundation on how we aim to support our communities by listening and observing the things that they feel they need us to prioritize first. The Hochul administration has made an unprecedented commitment and priority to responding to the gun violence epidemic that is affecting our communities, specific communities around the state, and I'm excited to be a part of the effort as we aim to build infrastructure that speaks to community and hopes to be able to support community moving forward in ways that government hasn't been able to do. So excited for the opportunities, and I thank all of our local mayors for having us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
So we'll now take questions, either ourselves or the mayors, if they so choose. Unless you'd like to say something first? No? Okay. All right.
The stats, at least in Albany, I have a question for Mayor Sheehan. The stats, at least in Albany, are showing that police have been able to recover more guns this year from the street, at least at this point, than last year. Does that have anything to do with the state partnership, and how does that kind of work with the state?
Well, absolutely. Our partnership with the state and with DCJS is critically important, and really it's linked to our ability to be as effective as we have been in getting guns off the street. It also is concerning for all of us mayors because we know that there is a proliferation of firearms coming into our communities. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is that what we heard about today was also the importance of funding the demand side. We can do all that we are doing to deal with the supply side of preventing guns from coming into our community, but we have to look at why people are picking up guns. And we have to do that with people who are working in the community, who are seeing the dynamics of what is going on and are seeing where needs are not being met, so that we can work together with those community partners who are in the best position to provide the response and the resources that are necessary and get it directly into their hands to continue the work that they're doing. Many of the successes that we have had have resulted from community cooperation and collaboration. And that occurs when you are able to work with trusted partners and when the community has started to develop and reconnect its trust with law enforcement. But there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to do that, and funding is required, and that is why the resources that the state is bringing to bear is going to be so important to the city of Albany and to all of our communities if we're going to be successful in continuing to reduce violence in our communities.
Do you think having a joint effort between community partners, state and city leaders makes a difference in silencers individually all points?
So I welcome the mayor's thoughts as well. I think from the state perspective, this is our 8th session where we've gone around to different cities, and I think what we've heard kind of universally is that coordination is key. There's no one capacity that exists in either a city government agency or a county agency or the state agency that is going to solve the gun violence epidemic. And so Kalyana, who brings a public health approach to gun violence, has a whole of government approach that we are kind of abiding by and adopting, because we want to understand not only what's driving gun violence today, but what are the social determinants of well-being generally, so that we can enlist our partner agencies in state government, but also local government. And so it's really the sum being more than just one individual part. So, and mayors, anything you want to add to that?
How, this could be for anyone, and the second one is for the mayors, how at all did the conversation of bail come up, if at all, in today's conversation, and was there anything that you learned about that? And then for the mayors, was there anything that you learned new today that you didn't know as in your conversation either with the state or with community partners?
So on the first point, we didn't talk about recent changes to bail or things that were adopted in the budget other than the resources. So it would be speculative on kind of, we didn't talk about that. We talked more about the need to hear community voices and for where's capacity necessary in social work, case management, the things that are going to drive a difference within the communities. So
is it fair to say that in a conversation about causes and determinants on gun violence, bail is not a part of the conversation today?
I would say that it wasn't brought up in this topic of conversation because this was more rooted in what the community needs and what the mayors have been seeing within each of their jurisdictions. What mayors?
I'll just note that Schenectady, Albany, and Troy speak regularly about a whole host of issues, including violence and gun violence. We work closely with our community members. I'm not sure that anything new was unearthed in those conversations today, but we shared those understandings with the state, which is critically important because the state brings important resources to bear. And I think our stories are pretty much in line with the 7 or 8 preceding meetings that occurred around the state on this topic.
Thank you.
That the governor has mentioned SNUG as one of the big organizations that she's looking to expand and setting on to really help with this problem. Are there any other organizations locally that are working with?
Yeah, so SNUG, which is operated by DCJS, works with 12 cities, and we partner with community-based organizations within each of those cities to fund both violence interrupters, but also social workers. And the social workers provide services not only to the clients, but also to the interrupters, who oftentimes are dealing with secondhand trauma in and of themselves. And so this year, there's resources in the budget to expand to 3 new cities, and so we're excited about that. And the community-based organizations represent that are part of SNUG represent the kind of the gamut of all the different types of community action agencies and others that you would expect to see. So today's conversation, we had our SNUG partners here, but also groups that do work that's similar in Schenectady. So.
Will this information and discussions that we're having be related to the local police departments, because there are not representatives from the city police departments here for these conversations?
Well,
Yeah. But
I would just, yes. But, with respect to the law enforcement side of it, we work with DCJS and, are part of the GIVE program, a number of initiatives that are also funded. And I think it's also really important for us to recognize that there are initiatives that need to be funded. There is work that has to be done that does not involve law enforcement and should not involve law enforcement, and that is every bit as important in working to deal with trauma and with harm that happens in our community that can lead to violent crime, and it's important to do that with providers who are part of the community, who are trusted by the community, and who are seen as working with families and working with individuals to address the underlying causes and challenges that they're facing that are putting them at risk of either being the victim of violence or committing violence.
We're heading into the
To health care, access to mental health services for individuals, access to food security. These are complex challenges that we see in our communities, and we need to have this holistic approach, which is why I think it's important that we had this conversation and that we continue to focus on this is not a one approach. There's no one approach to dealing with community violence. And in fact, law enforcement is only one piece of what needs to be a broader investment in a community and in communities that have been disinvested for decades and decades and, quite frankly, centuries.
Schenectady, we're seeing a drop in gun violence, but as Mayor Sheehan pointed out, it is not one event, one program, one concept that's going to solve these. It's this collaborative effort of working together, creating educational opportunities, creating job opportunities, creating a sense of equality within the communities that give people other opportunities as opposed to choices that they make in life that just put them down the wrong path. And that's why we're here today collectively to talk about these scenarios, to see what's working one place or the other, and how can we collectively engage across the capital region. Because a lot of the activities and those individuals that make poor choices in one of our communities influence the activities in another community. And it's that overlapping that creates a bigger problem. And how do we, again, stay ahead of that and hopefully continue the trend downward, and so that we all have a safe and enjoyable summer.
So there's little to add to that in Troy. We do recognize, as has been mentioned, that violence it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen without cause. There are a number of causes that are behind that, and it's cyclical. So our numbers today are about where they were pre-pandemic, and they went up during the pandemic as they did in many cities. So in response, we are addressing the programs that our youth are able to access during the summer in a more coordinated fashion, and trying to spread the word to parents so that parents and school districts actually know the breadth and the depth of the youth programming that's available to keep kids occupied during the summer months. We've also employed in the city of Troy a more robust community policing initiative, and that's more police that aren't out there necessarily for enforcement, but to meet and walk among and form relationships with community members and help community members resolve problems before they escalate into more of a crisis situation that causes trauma that leads to violence in so many communities. But we've been piloting that since late last year to great effect in the city, and have had very, very promising and positive interactions with our communities.
Mayor Madden just mentioned a little bit, but a lot of these incidents are involving some of our younger people. Is that a big topic of conversation at meetings like these?
Yeah, I think the focus of the conversation, really talks about, it runs the gamut, right? It's about youth who are in the school system. It's about teenagers who may have become disconnected during the pandemic from school or from employment, but then also adults. And so I think each of the times we're talking about gun violence, we're trying to understand the interventions, the preventions that are going to be necessary within any community to make sure that people are pursuing the best outcomes. So I think that's we recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and that we're dealing with families and not just necessarily individuals or like one youth, one teen, or one adult. So. Thank you. Oh, Kelly.
Hey, so I'd like to jump in a little bit there as far as youth are concerned, because that's my purview. That's where I come from. So when we're having this conversation, we're talking about prevention. Thank you, Mayor Sheehan, for talking about targeted disinvestment in the communities that we're talking about. Those who have the highest rates of gun violence also have the highest rates of negative health incomes, also have the worst statistics in education. We're looking to think about a holistic approach, and in doing that, we have to start as young as we can, right, to be responsive to what's happening. So when you talk about youth, in order to really get at the intergenerational trauma that's affecting these communities, we're starting with youth as the entry point, right? We like to get, where it's happening right now, but as Joe said, this is an approach that we look to affect the whole environment. That's families, that's communities, that's shop owners. We want to build an infrastructure that lasts and can make it through unfortunate things such as COVID, and that we're not continuing, again, to continue to have the same conversation about the same communities over and over again. So though youth are where we're starting from, there's a large picture of what we're trying to do for entire communities. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just, I do want to just say, though, because this is my,
No, go
right?
for it, Mayor Sheehan. Say it.
The youth who are living in the communities that we're talking about are not inherently violent. They are not born criminals. They are incredible, amazing, wonderful children who have amazing futures ahead for them if we adults get our act together and ensure that they have the same opportunities as their peers who are living in wealthier, more suburbanized, affluent areas of this region. And so when we talk about our youth, I hesitate because in linking that with anti-violence. This is about providing our children with the opportunities that other children enjoy day in and day out and never even question it. We do not refer to the Bethlehem soccer program as an anti-violence program. Okay? So our kids are amazing. Our kids are kids that you should get to know. Our kids are kids that you should hire. Right? These are young people with incredible potential. And yes, We're going to be asking the state and DCJS and the governor and every program that we can get funding for the funding that they deserve and that gives them the same access to opportunities as their peers who happen to live in other places. So yes, it is important. Yes, we start with our kids. But, you know, this is because this is what we need to do if we are going to reverse hundreds of years of disinvestment and of creating environments that make it really hard for someone to be healthy, for someone to get access to the food that they need, the education that they need, and the services and the amenities that they need to be able to move themselves forward and accomplish what they want. So, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you. You said all the things. I hope to learn how to be able to say no. Yeah, I can talk to you guys. I can say.